Hello and thanks for joining us for our mid-morning edition of Arirang News. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start by taking a look at the day's headlines. The lull before the storm. Polling stations across America are closing in the country's crunch midterms. Elections seen as a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. The first results are already starting to filter through. High fine dust levels make an unwelcome return to central South Korea, with concentrations reaching unhealthy levels. Emergency response measures are imposed to mitigate the worst of it. Plus, just as agreed at the Pyongyang summit in September, South and North Korea are moving to strengthen their cooperation on health and medical care. Only one place to start today, and that's the 2018 midterm elections in the United States. Normally, these midterms, which come halfway through a president's four-year term, are not considered as big as the presidential election itself. But some pundits say this election is attracting so much interest as it's being seen as a referendum on President Donald Trump, a divisive figure to say the least. Our Cha Sang-mi, I'm happy to say, joins me in the studio once again to tell us what we know so far. Sang-mi, thank you for being with us. So we must stress that Americans are still casting their ballots in some states, especially those on the western side of the country, but some polls have closed. So far, what do we know?
Right, so the first polls closed at 6 p.m. local time in Indiana and Kentucky. That's about 2 hours ago. And 6 more states have been closing. They include Virginia, Florida, and Georgia. And now back to the state of Indiana, which is one of the closely watched states. Democratic Senator Joe Donnelly is being challenged by businessman Mike Brown in a tight race in a state where Trump won by 20% points back in 2016. And just around now, we are standing by for the polls closing in some 23 more states, mainly along the East Coast, but also including Texas, Tennessee, and Michigan. In preliminary results so far from the national exit poll provided by the RCP, we know that nearly 44% of voters approve of President Trump's job performance, while 54% disapprove. The polls opened at 5 a.m. local time in Vermont and other states, and voters are still casting their ballots in the West Coast. The polls will close at around 6 to 9 p.m. according to each state, and we will start getting the results in the next few hours.
Yes, already been confirmed that in Vermont, former presidential candidate Bernie Sanders and former vice presidential candidate Tim Kaine have actually won re-election. So not a huge surprise. That is a very liberal state in the United States. But Sang-mi, tell us more about all these seats that are up for grabs, because in the Congress it's all of them, isn't it? And in the Senate it's some.
Exactly. So, as you know, there are 2 chambers in the Congress. One is the House of Representatives, which has 435 seats, and all of them are up for grabs. Then in the upper chamber, the Senate, there are 100 seats, but this time around, only one-third of them, 35 seats, are being contended. At the moment, Republicans control both chambers. In the House, they hold a 235 to 193 majority. So for Democrats to take control of the House, they will need to flip 23 seats. Those seats are apportioned based on the relative population of each state. So California, for instance, gets the most with 53 seats. Alaska gets 1. The members serve 2-year terms. It's much tighter in the Senate, where the Republicans have only 2 more seats. Senators serve for 6 years, and each state gets 2 regardless of population. The current Congress runs until January 3rd.
Okay, so those that win election today won't actually take their position in the Congress until January 3rd of 2019. So tell us more about the scenarios then, because if you've been watching CNN or Fox News or any other US media outlet, you'll know that they've been saying the most likely scenario is that the Democrats, they take the House of Representatives back, perhaps by a slim margin, but the Republicans are still looking strong in the Senate, with some projecting that they could actually add to their seats in the Senate. But regardless, how do you think we see these midterms affecting the Trump administration's policies?
Right, so a lot of issues are actually at stake. Pundits call that this is one of the most important elections of their lifetime. And there's a reason for that, because we know that President Trump has been very busy crisscrossing the country, holding Make America Great Again rallies, talking about illegal immigration and the strong economic gains under his administration. America's economy is indeed humming and the unemployment is low. He also stressed about the border fears for Democrats to take over the Congress. So here's what will happen. We know for sure they will pick a new speaker if the Democrats take the House. That's Nancy Pelosi, the veteran progressive from San Francisco. This will also mean more women in Congress, and a lot of investigations will open or maybe reopen against President Trump. As for immigration, the Democrats may try to keep the bill on the Dreamers, the undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. at a young age. The economy will return to gridlock. It will make it harder for the Republicans to push through with tax reforms. Another key issues would be health care. The Democrats will stop Trump's attempts to repeal Obamacare. So then what happens if the Republicans keep both the chambers? President Trump's protectionist trade policy will continue. The sanctions will remain on Iran, and the trade disputes will go on with China, will also likely to go on for a long time, perhaps with more rounds of tariffs imposed on Beijing. Yet the talks with North Korea will also likely to go on. That's a good news, along with Trump's strong efforts to build up the military. As for the health care, the Republicans will want to push for changes in the Obamacare. What happens then if Democrats take the House and the Senate? The Democrats will try to moderate President Trump's protectionist movement in general, including on China, the European Union, and Japan. There will be no more border walls, no more funding for the walls, or a strengthening of the security measures. The Democrats had said they want to boost infrastructure, and the foreign policy will see some major shifts, like limiting arms sales to Saudi Arabia. The scrapped climate change issues can also be brought back.
Yeah, we're just watching lots of video of former President Obama coming out there. It's generally customary that ex-presidents don't get that involved in midterm elections, especially so soon after they've left office. But it seems that Obama really wants to go out there and help the Democrats, and we'll see whether that works out. Sang-mi, thank you ever so much for your comprehensive coverage there, and I believe you'll be back again at noon with our EGU.
Thank you for having me.
Now, in other news, South Korea has been blanketed in a coating of fine dust over the past few days. The situation has become so unbearable that emergency fine dust reduction measures have come into effect for all of us here in Seoul and also the capital surrounding areas for the first time in 7 months. Lee Seung-jae with the details.
Emergency fine dust reduction measures came into effect as of 6 a.m. for Seoul, Incheon, and much of Gyeonggi-do province, as fine dust levels have skyrocketed to unhealthy levels. According to the Environment Ministry, the measures will remain in place until 9 p.m. Civil servants in those regions are to follow the alternate driving day system, meaning cars with license plates that end in odd numbers will be allowed on the streets, while even-numbered license plates will not. The Seoul government has also temporarily closed 360 public parking lots. However, free public transportation will not be provided as the Seoul government canceled the policy in February. Diesel cars registered before December 31, 2005 and weigh over 2.5 tons will be banned from Seoul's roads during this period. Drivers who fail to comply will be fined roughly $88. The emergency measures come as the hourly average of PM10 fine dust particles reached 50 micrograms per cubic meter in the air in Seoul and its surrounding areas on Tuesday. The forecast for Wednesday is expected to exceed that number. An ultra-fine dust advisory remains in place for Seoul, while levels are bad in 12 cities and provinces across the nation. Authorities have advised citizens to use protective masks when outdoors and cautioned those with health issues, as well as children and the elderly, to stay indoors. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has expressed deep concerns about Japanese leaders' angry reaction to a recent ruling by South Korea's Supreme Court on wartime forced labor. The Foreign Affairs Ministry said on Tuesday that it cannot help feeling deeply regretful about how Japan is continuing its harsh rhetoric without looking into the fundamental problem. It said countries must respect court's decisions, including Japan. The ministry also warned that putting too much emphasis on this case will damage the two countries' efforts to build a future-looking relationship. South Korea's Supreme Court ruled last week that a Japanese steelmaker will have to provide legal compensation to 4 South Koreans forced to work for the company during World War II without any pay at all. Earlier Tuesday, Tokyo's foreign minister called the ruling, quote, violence and a, quote, challenge to the international order. Delegations from the two Koreas are meeting at the Joint Liaison Office in North Korea's border town of Kaesong. They are discussing cooperation on health and medical care, and this is the first time they've talked about this issue together in well over a decade. Oh Jung-hee reports.
Just as agreed at the Inter-Korean Summit in September, South and North Korea are moving to strengthen their cooperation on health and medical care. Senior health officials from Seoul and Pyongyang are meeting on Wednesday at the Joint Liaison Office in Kaesong. From the South, Vice Health Minister Kwon Dok-chul is leading a 3-member delegation, as is the North's Bang Myung-soo, who heads Pyongyang's hygiene agency.
The government expects this to be an opportunity for a broad discussion by the two Koreas about matters of interest in establishing a system to counter epidemics together and about general health and medical care.
At their September summit, the leaders of South and North agreed to expand cooperation in health and medical care, including setting up emergency measures to prevent the spread of epidemics. And Wednesday's talks are expected to be about just that. This is the first time they're meeting about that topic in 11 years. After the second Inter-Korean Summit back in 2007, the two Koreas had agreed on a few specific items to work on in the field, like building factories to make medical supplies, controlling epidemics, and conducting surveys. Later that year, they had a working-level meeting and conducted a survey the year after that, but the projects couldn't go on after South Korea adopted its own unilateral sanctions against the North in 2010 in response to the regime's sinking of a South Korean warship. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Military officials from the two Koreas and the UN command held talks on Tuesday about plans for demilitarizing the Joint Security Area, otherwise known as the JSA. They agreed to a set of joint surveillance rules which could eventually allow tourists from anywhere in the world to freely cross to and from the border. Kan Hyung-woo with the details.
People from the two Koreas may soon be able to walk freely across the border at the Joint Security Area for the first time in over 4 decades. Military officials from the two Koreas and the UN command held a 3-way meeting on Tuesday at the Freedom House on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom. According to Seoul's Defense Ministry, they agreed to draw up rules of interaction for the security personnel that either side stations in the other's area. Having personnel on both sides was part of September's military agreement. Seoul's Defense Ministry said that they will come up with a final draft of the rules in the near future through the exchange of documents. The three sides evaluated the disarmament that took place in late October, inspecting the newly built guard posts at the entrances to the southern and northern sides. The three sides also took a look at both Korea's surveillance equipment and how it's run, discussing ways to adjust it and share information. Once everything's set up, not only foreign tourists but also Korean visitors will be allowed to cross freely over the military demarcation line from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. There are 35 soldiers in the JSA, including 5 officers each from South and North for surveillance purposes. They no longer carry firearms and now wear yellow armbands that read Panmunjom Civil Police. Tuesday's delegations were led by South Korean Army Colonel Jo Yong-gun, North Korean Army Colonel Chang-nam, and the U.S. Army Colonel Burke Hamilton. Kanyo, Arirang News.
South Korea's presidential office says it expects high-level talks between North Korea and the US on Thursday in New York to take on not only denuclearization, but also establishing formal diplomatic relations between the two. A spokesperson for South Korea's top office noted that the State Department mentioned Mike Pompeo, who is the Secretary of State, and Kim Yong-chol, who is one of the closest aides to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, would be discussing the so-called 4 pillars of the joint statement adopted in Singapore in June. 2 of those pillars are establishing lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and diplomatic relations between Pyongyang and Washington. South Korea's First Lady, Kim Jung-sook, is continuing her tour of India. On Tuesday, she attended a groundbreaking ceremony to build a commemorative park for an Indian princess who later became the queen of an ancient Korean dynasty. Our Blue House correspondent, Hwang Ho-jun, with the details.
Her message, calling for a stronger bilateral friendship, could not have been clearer.
I pray the long friendship between us will take on a new dimension. Let's also pray for good relations and joint prosperity.
She also emphasized India and South Korea are close friends and partners in creating a future of peace and prosperity on the peninsula and in the region. First Lady Kim's comments came on Tuesday during a congratulatory speech at the Diwali Festival, a Hindu festival of lights and the largest event in India. Noting that Diwali celebrates the victory of light over darkness, Kim also referred to the so-called candlelight revolution that led to the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye and paved the way for the Moon administration to settle in. She noted how the incident is now illustrated in the textbooks of schools in India. Earlier in the day, the First Lady attended the groundbreaking ceremony for an upgrade to the memorial park for Queen Heo, the Indian wife of the founding ruler of Korea's ancient Gaya kingdom, King Kim-soo. South Korea's culture minister was also there along with the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath. The event was part of the agreement made between First Lady Kim and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to promote people-to-people exchanges between Seoul and New Delhi. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, Rotary Korea, one of the Rotary clubs, which is a global network that volunteers to bring lasting changes to the world, is holding its annual conference right now in the southeastern city of Busan. Our Hong Yu went to check it out and files this report.
The Rotary Korea Conference kicked off on Tuesday in Busan and it will continue until Thursday. During these 3 days, Rotarians will go over their achievements of this year and devise a direction and strategy for 2019. About 1,000 Rotarians, including the president of Rotary International, Barry Razin, and General Secretary John Hugo, gathered to share the newest policies and programs of Rotary International and to come up with solutions to some difficulties that Rotary Korea is facing. One of the biggest things Rotary International has achieved is reducing the number of children suffering from polio. It was back in 1985 that Rotary International took on the challenge of eradicating polio worldwide. At the time, there were 350,000 cases of polio a year in 125 countries. Today, the numbers are down to only 25 cases in 2 countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan.
So while we do work in all the 6 areas of focus, we will not replace our #1 priority until we are certified eradicated.
Rotary Korea was established in 1927, now has more than 60,000 members in 19 different regional clubs, providing humanitarian services to their local communities.
Korea is one of our strongest Rotary countries. We have about 66,000 members. We have 1,646 Rotary clubs. So it's one of our strongest Rotary countries. We're seeing very strong membership growth in Korea. And again, our Korean Rotarians are very active in all kinds of peace projects, scholarship programs, water and sanitation programs, disease prevention and treatment. Many Rotary clubs in Korea work with Rotary clubs in other parts of the world to deal with humanitarian issues that are in those countries. And so we're very proud of Rotary here in Korea.
Rotary Korea will be turning 100 years old in 2027, and as they meet this week, the Rotarians will be laying out the goals they hope to achieve by the time that anniversary comes. 홍유, Arirang News, Busan.
Okay, world news time now, and Iran's foreign minister has slammed the reimposition of US sanctions, describing them as an, quote, indiscriminate assault on his country. Russia and Turkey, not exactly Washington's best friends, have also criticized the Trump administration's sanctions. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Noah Adam. So Adam, these sanctions are facing quite the international backlash.
That's right, Mark. In a YouTube video on Tuesday, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said the US punitive measures were absurd, unlawful and fundamentally flawed. He added the Trump administration would regret what he called the unwise move. He also claimed the latest round of sanctions, those took effect on Monday, was pushing the US further into global isolation. Earlier, Zarif took to Twitter to mock some of the targets of the sanctions, describing it as a desperate psychological ploy. In that tweet, he wrote that the Trump administration designated a bank that was closed 6 years ago and a ship that sank in a widely televised saga. He was referring to Iran's Tat Bank and the crude oil tanker Sanchi, which sank off China's east coast earlier this year. Meanwhile, Turkey and Russia have also blasted the US penalties. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Tuesday that his country will not obey the sanctions, describing Washington's move as violating the global balance. His comments came despite Turkey being included in a waiver list that allows 8 countries to temporarily continue importing Iranian oil without consequences. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov voiced similar sentiment, pledging that Moscow would find ways to circumvent the sanctions and that Moscow will continue financial ties with Tehran. The European Union has granted conditional approval for Disney to buy 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets. In order for the deal to go through, Disney has committed to selling off its stakes in factual channels it controls in Europe in order to maintain fair competition. They include History, H2, Crime and Investigation, and Blaze and Lifetime channels, which are currently controlled by A&E Television Networks, a joint venture between Disney and Hearst. Disney shareholders and US regulators had already approved the Fox bid in June. The takeover would expand Disney's unrivaled portfolio of some of the world's most popular characters, uniting Mickey Mouse and the Marvel superheroes with Fox's X-Men and The Simpsons. A UN investigation has found that more than 200 mass graves containing thousands of bodies have been found in areas of Iraq that were once controlled by the Islamic State group. The UN Human Rights Office added it believes more such graves could be found in the future. The agency said they were found mostly in the northern and western parts of the country and could contain anywhere between 6,000 and 12,000 bodies. The agency's spokesperson called on the government of Iraq to help with giving bereaved families some closure.
We are calling on the government of Iraq to establish a public, centralized registry of missing persons, as well as a federal office of missing persons. These mass grave sites documented in our report are a testament to harrowing human loss, profound suffering, and shocking cruelty. Determining the circumstances surrounding the significant loss of life will be an important step in the mourning process for families and their journey to secure truth and justice.
The UN agency also urged the international community to provide more resources and support to the Iraqi government to help carry out a detailed forensic search of the sites.
Good morning. Today is Ipdong, the traditional start of winter in Korea. Temperatures will be still bearable, but there are still high levels of ultra-fine dust that blew in from China, with an ultra-fine dust advisory still in place for many western regions, including here in the capital. And sporadic showers won't do much to ease the dustiness. Western regions will continue to have very high levels of ultra-fine dust all day today. Meanwhile, a heavy rain advisory has been issued in parts of Gangwon-do province, with up to 50 millimeters of rainfall expected, including in Gangneung. And some more unwelcome news. The air conditions in China this winter could be the worst they have been all year, and that will surely have an impact on the Korean peninsula. And as for today's daily highs, Seoul will reach up to 16 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Busan will have clean air to breathe in at a high of 19 degrees. But relief from the bad air is on the way. Tomorrow's heavy showers and strong gusts will wash away the dust in the air. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now. Do stay tuned to Arirang TV. We'll have our next newscast coming up at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.